Some perks become famous for how truly overpowered they are, like Old Decisive Strike or Old Undying, while most blend into the crowd due to their astounding mediocrity. But others don't get that luxury, instead becoming famous, or should I say infamous, for how truly awful they are. Whether it's for providing practically nothing of value like Unrelenting, Call of Brine, Fire Up, Lightweight, and Self-Preservation, with long-standing champions of garbage like Territorial Imperative and Beast of Prey, or for being actively bad for you with significant downsides like No Mither, which allows survivors to fully recover from the down state as many times as they like, with the downside of being permanently injured the entire game with no way of healing to full health. Or Dark Arrogance, which allows the killer to vault faster, but doesn't block windows like Bamboozle, and also doesn't let you vault as fast as Superior Anatomy, and also comes with the hefty downside of extending all stuns by a whopping 25%. Which then leads many to label them as troll perks, perks that people would only use if they're trolling, memeing, or rolling them in a perk randomizer, since there's very little reason to use any of them for genuine gameplay. But what happens when the devs buff one of these awful perks without taking into consideration how that might synergize with other perks in the game? While the buff itself may have been innocent enough in a vacuum, combining it with other perks could create a monster. Well, we don't need to imagine, because this story has happened already. Let me tell you how Buckle Up broke Dead by Daylight. The story starts all the way back on the 2nd of April 2019 with the release of Ashley Williams. Oh wait, never mind, it actually begins before then, since Behaviour accidentally leaked him before he was due to release by adding his perks to the PS4 build of the game. Anyway, Ashley of course released with the absolutely game-breaking perk Metal of Man, which I'm sure you're all familiar with by now, as I've already made a video talking about that perk alone, which absolutely stole the show from the moment it was released, or leaked. Look, the point I'm trying to make is, it was all about Metal. His two other perks, Flip Flop and Buckle Up, were left in the dirt for a long time, both of which being considered wastes of perk slots. Flip Flop converted half of your recovery bar to wiggle progress, which had potential, but ultimately ended up providing value far too rarely to be worth the slot, as the killer would need to leave you slugged for the maximum recovery duration of 30 seconds to get maximum value and then pick you up, but there's no guarantee that you'll wiggle out before they hook you, even with that 50% wiggle head start. Buckle Up, however, had a very low value ceiling, as it simply allowed you to tell how close a down survivor was to recovering based on the colour of their aura, with the secondary effect of briefly showing you the killer's aura if you successfully revived a slug. To someone who doesn't play DBD often, that might sound like some fairly valuable information, but experienced players would be quick to point out how easy it was to infer somebody's recovery progress yourself by asking two simple questions. 1. Is the down survivor playing the recovering animation, where the player's model repeatedly attempts to stand up but keeps falling? If the answer is yes, then 2. How long has it been, roughly, since they went down? If it's in the ballpark of 30 seconds or longer, then they're ready to be revived. If the answer's no, then there's no point going for them. As for the secondary effect of the perk, revealing the killer's aura for 6 seconds upon reviving someone, while revealing the killer's aura is always nice, in this sort of situation it's not the most valuable of times to see their aura. If the killer's long gone and you're safely reviving them, you don't really care about seeing the killer's aura when they're miles away. If the killer's actively pressuring you and defending the slug, then you're likely looking right at the killer and would gain nothing from seeing their aura. 2 months afterwards, Metal of Man would receive a substantial nerf, immediately bringing it out of the utterly game-breaking category and into the has potential for value if you fit your entire build around this perk category, with now none of his perks being particularly strong. It wouldn't be until a year and a half later, on the 1st of December 2020, that things would start to get any better for Ash's perks, but it wouldn't be a direct buff to any of his perks that does it. Instead, it's the release of Elodie Rakoto, which brought us the addition of Power Struggle, a perk that synergized perfectly with Flip Flop, finally giving it purpose. Power Struggle allows a survivor to pallet save themselves while on the killer's shoulder upon reaching a certain amount of wiggle progress. By itself, the odds of ever getting value from it was incredibly rare, as the killer would have to have carried you for a certain amount of time while you wiggled, then walk through a pallet of their own accord once you've wiggled enough, which is just not going to happen. but combining flip-flop and power struggle allowed for a unique result, where if a survivor went down under a pallet, they could start recovering. Then when the killer picked them up, half of it would convert to wiggle progress, therefore instantly reaching the required wiggle progress, allowing you to instantly drop the pallet on yourself the moment the killer picked you up. So both Metal of Man and Flip-Flop could find some use if paired with the right builds. It was now just Buckle Up that was left in the dirt by itself. While it would receive a minor buff by increasing the duration it revealed the killer's aura for, the perk was still underwhelming. Eventually, Buckle Up had to be reworked due to the HUD overhaul and the addition of status indicators which showed survivors what actions their teammates were doing and how far along they were on that action, including recovery, which meant that Buckle Up's gimmicky aura intensity effect that allowed you to see how far into recovery somebody was not only base kit now, but a significantly improved version of it too, as a cut and dry progress bar was far more precise than an aura gradually getting more saturated. So, what changes did Buckle Up get? Rework. Removed the recovery aura intensity effect. The killer's aura is now revealed while healing a down survivor instead of after completing a revival. Added a new secondary effect. Upon completing a revival, the revived player gets a 10% haste effect for 10 seconds. And with that, Buckle Up was now still a bad perk. Don't get me wrong, seeing the killer's aura during the revive instead of after it was a nice defensive change, so you'd now know if the killer would be back before you successfully got the revive off, but it still wasn't enough to justify picking it. So, 6 months later, they decided to finally give it a proper buff. Successful revives now grant 10 seconds of endurance instead of haste. Buff. Both players now receive the effect instead of just the person who was revived. This effect was now very strong. It meant that if the killer left somebody slugged long enough for you to get the revive off, you were both guaranteed to get away scot-free even if the person doing the reviving was injured. No matter which one of you the killer decided to hit, endurance would eat the hit and the survivor would go into deep wounds instead of going back down. While this new effect was a very strong answer to slugging, the killer did have some options to deal with it. Option 1. Simply pick the survivor up before enough time has passed for them to be fully revived. Option 2. Leave the slug there and commit to a different survivor. You still gain tremendous pressure having 3 people off gens: the slug, the person going to revive them, and the person you're now chasing. Like I said earlier, the buff was innocent enough by itself, but as with the rest of Ash's perks, synergy changes everything. The thing keeping Buckle Up in check was time. The amount of time it took for the slug to either recover or for somebody to revive them before Buckle Up could activate and provide value. But what if there was a way to not only reduce the time this took, but outright remove it? Introducing one of the most altruistic perks in the game, For the People. For the People was one of those rare perks that has an incredibly powerful effect, but a perfectly balanced downside that pairs with it. For the People allows the user to instantly heal another survivor in entire health state in one single frame, but at the cost of the user's own health state. You literally sacrifice your own health for your teammate. Now that's altruism. So your typical For the People use would be if a teammate was getting tunneled, you could quickly juice them up, now making yourself vulnerable instead. Sure, you're vulnerable now instead, but it does have use as it can force the killer to make a choice. Resume tunneling the person who just got healed, taking an even longer chase since there's an extra health state to burn through, or switch targets to the person who used For the People who is now vulnerable. Sure, they haven't been hooked as many times as the other person, but they're a much easier target right now. The risk of losing your own health is what kept it in check. For the People allows you to instantly heal but leaves you injured. Buckle Up provides endurance but requires time spent healing first. See where I'm going with this? These two perks had absolutely incredible potential value, but were kept in check by a certain weakness, and by sheer luck, they both perfectly covered each other's weaknesses, eliminating the downsides altogether, harmonizing in the perfect storm of ultimate synergy, instant, uncounterable health states. And if you know anything about multiplayer games, if there's something to be exploited, players are absolutely going to exploit it. Which is precisely what happened. Upon downing a survivor, killers would immediately see their teammate bolt towards them, instantly revive them, and no matter which survivor the killer hit next, it was gonna take another 2 hits to down them. But that's not all. Survivors who are in deep wounds are wiped clean once the killer downs them, which means there is nothing stopping another teammate from chaining another FTP and buckle up proc, starting the cycle once again. There was technically a cooldown on For the People, as upon using it, it would also afflict the user with the broken status effect for a whole minute, after which they then need to heal up again. After all, you can't give out a health state that you don't have. But even with that, the value this perk provided was absolutely monumental. The amount of pressure that the killer would lose from just one survivor using this perk combo cannot be stressed enough. And things only got worse in the rare scenario where multiple survivors were using it. Alone, these perks left the killer with a choice to make, but together, there was no choice anymore. Both options required the killer to shred through 2 more health states, effectively starting the chase from scratch again. The person using this combo would often rush in to use it the moment a teammate was downed, often getting the proc off while the killer was still wiping their weapon or breaking a pallet. So killers would often find themselves at the brunt of this even if they weren't slugging. Things needed to change. So 11 months later, on the 3rd of June 2024, Buckle Up received a nerf. Nerf. Successful revives now provide haste again instead of endurance. Buff. Haste changed from 10% for 10 seconds to 50% for 5 seconds. Buff. Now hides scratch marks for the duration of the haste. Nerf. Now the haste and hidden scratch marks only affect the person who was revived, putting an end to Buckle Up's time in the spotlight once again. With this combo taking place much more recently than most perks I talk about on this channel, many newer Dead by Daylight players got a small taste of what us old school players had to put up with for years back in the day, as what you saw with these 2 perks is just like what original Borrowed Time used to do, applying to both the unhooked person and the unhooker, only it didn't come with any downsides unlike For the People.